Prepare to embark on a captivating journey that will lead us away from the exhaustive chronicles of mortals and the thunderous fields of epic battles. We will ascend to dizzying heights, straight to sacred Mount Olympus, where the air seems to carry the scent of ambrosia, and the clouds, like silent witnesses, guard ancient secrets. Here among majestic peaks reside the gods, whose earthly statues only dimly reflect their true, often quite tumultuous nature. There's something wonderfully comforting in knowing that others delve into the same serene mythology as we do. So we invite you to settle in, let the world's clamour fade, and join us as we pull back the veil on what the Olympian gods were truly like. Our narrative, like any good story, begins with a view of a mountain bathed in the rays of the setting sun. But this is no ordinary mountain. This is Mount Olympus, the divine abode of the immortals, where clouds gather like opulent court draperies, and the air is delicately fragrant with ambrosia. Perhaps at times the scent of incense, from offerings rising from the mortal world, spread far below, also drifts up. It rises, majestic and regal, on the northern frontier of ancient Greece. Its peak is so often shrouded in mist that it seemed entirely natural for the ancients to surmise that someone or something must surely reside there. In reality, Olympus is a very real mountain, the highest in Greece, reaching nearly 3,000 meters. For the ancient Greeks, however, it was far more than a mere collection of rocks and ridges. No, it was sacred geography, a celestial nexus of power, enveloped in ever-changing light and an eternally watchful silence. They saw it not as an object to conquer, but as something to venerate, a divine penthouse, if you will, with very exclusive residents. And these residents, yes, they are the Olympians. 12 gods and goddesses, give or take a few, depending on which myth you trust and how generous you are with seating arrangements. Together they form the core of the ancient Greek Pantheon. Capricious, passionate, thunderous, petty yet brilliant. They were worshipped, feared, and sometimes gossiped about for centuries. In essence, they were like celebrities, but with one crucial caveat. These celebrities could hurl lightning bolts and transform people into olive trees. But before we introduce each of them individually, let's linger a moment on the setting. For on Olympus a twilight descends, that hour when the golden light softly fades behind marble colonnades, and divine feasts are just beginning. Imagine vast halls, gleaming with polished stone, where a lyre gently plays in the background, and long tables groan under the weight of unimaginable fruits, cheeses aged by the winds of prophecy, and wine so potent it would make a satyr weep with joy. This is not a place of solemnity. Olympus, in the myths, was a vibrant, divine, sometimes chaotic place, much like a very large, dysfunctional family gathering, complete with a healthy dose of immortality and magical livestock, the kind of place where someone is always playing the harp and someone else is always dramatically storming off. If you're picturing marble floors and ionic columns, you're not entirely wrong, but don't expect a neatly catalogued palace plan. Early Greek poets, Homer and Hesiod, speak of shining halls and cloudy gates, but they weren't architectural draftsmen. What we are given is a hint of immense beauty, shimmering materials and eternal comfort. Halls of bronze and gold, courtyards paved with sunlight, feasts that never end, and singing fountains. It's less a building and more a celestial atmosphere, imbued with magic. And what's a good atmosphere without a menu? You'll be pleased to know the gods dined quite well. Their diet consisted mainly of two things: ambrosia and nectar. Ambrosia, it was said, was the food of immortality. What it actually tasted like depends on the source. Some say it was honeyed bread, others a kind of fragrant perfume you absorbed with your essence, which frankly sounds more like skincare than a snack. Nectar, its liquid companion, flowed like sunlight in a cup, served in golden goblets, and kept everyone in a perpetually divine state of health, youth, and probably mild inebriation. The gods did not age, they did not sicken, they did not suffer the common indignities of mortal life, except for emotional outbursts which they had in abundance, and which could shake the very foundations of the world. However, the divine lifestyle was not without its responsibilities. Each god had, so to speak, their portfolio. Zeus, for instance, handled thunderstorms, law, and infidelity, which, incidentally, often sparked the greatest myths. Poseidon held sway over the sea, earthquakes, and a temperamental trident capable of conjuring storms. Athena oversaw wisdom, military strategy, and scowled over shields, foretelling victories or defeats. Each Olympian had their domain, and while some took their roles seriously, others used them as an excuse to meddle in mortal affairs or to skip staff meetings altogether, preferring their own, more entertaining pursuits. One might imagine a day on Olympus involved quite a bit of sitting around looking powerful, which, to be fair, it probably did. But it also meant making decisions upon which the fates of entire nations hinged. Would a hero succeed in their quest or meet a tragic end? Would a city be blessed with rain or buried under the ashes of divine wrath? Would a mortal's prayer be heard or mercilessly ignored? The gods were not bound by logic, for they were divine, and if they seemed inconsistent, well, that was the point. The world was unpredictable, as were its rulers, and their will could shift in an instant. From their cloudy thrones the gods observed mortal affairs with varying degrees of interest. They watched, judged, laughed, sometimes wept, and occasionally intervened, often dramatically, altering the course of history. The boundary between gods and mortals, you see, was not so rigid in ancient Greek thought. The gods were not distant deities, unreachable and abstract. They were close, familiar, emotionally turbulent. They could assume human form, walk among us, fall in love, or more often, lust, and produce heroes capable of slaying monsters and starting wars. Their children became demigods, whose lives were extraordinary but rarely long, filled with deeds and tragedies. But Olympus itself was different. It was the place the gods returned to, a safe haven above the chaos of the world. Imagine the moment after a storm. The clouds part, the golden glow returns, and a hush falls over the peaks. That was Olympus. Not a realm of perfection, but a divine pause. The one real constant in a world where nothing else lasted, where everything was subject to change. Now, for the company kept on this peak. We often speak of the 12 Olympians, but the list was not entirely fixed. It generally included Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Hephaestus, Aphrodite, Hermes, and either Dionysus or Hestia. Poor Hestia was sometimes scratched from the guest list, despite being the goddess of the hearth, keeping the home fires burning. It's assumed she didn't mind. She always seemed the type to prefer a quiet evening by the fire to a lightning bolt throwing contest between brothers, preferring peace and tranquility. Each god brought something unique to this divine collective. Apollo, shining and polished, never without his lyre or an enigmatic prophecy, his singing capable of captivating hearts. Artemis, watchful and swift, always elusive beneath the trees, was the embodiment of the wild. Ares, brawny and brash, was the kind of guest who eats all the olives and breaks the furniture, ever ready for battle. Aphrodite, all soft glances and dangerously persuasive silences, capable of driving any mortal and god mad. And Hermes, that cunning trickster with a smirk that told you he'd already stolen your sandals, was the messenger and patron of all rogues. They were gods, yes, but undeniably human in spirit. That was the genius of Greek mythology. Its deities reflected us in all our brilliant depravity, with all our vices and virtues. The Greeks built temples to them, yes, magnificent columns reaching for the sky, sanctuaries filled with incense and prayers. But they also told stories, myths passed from mouth to mouth, from campfires to amphitheatres, stories of love, betrayal, pride, revenge, stories that taught, warned, entertained, leaving a deep imprint on culture. Olympus was not just a place above the clouds. It was a theatrical stage, a family drama, a mirror of the human soul elevated to cosmic proportions. And what of the mortals who gazed upon the peak? They knew they would never see it firsthand. Olympus was shrouded not only in clouds but in mystery, inaccessible to mere mortals. No human was destined to reach it. Not truly. Those who tried, like the Titan Atlas, who carried the sky on his back, often paid dearly for their ambitions, condemning themselves to eternal torment. Olympus was a place of dreams. It was not for climbing. It was for imagining. And they imagined. Especially the poets whose words transported listeners into the world of the gods. Homer, in his Iliad and Odyssey, filled Olympus with shining halls and divine disputes, bringing it to life in the minds of generations. Hesiod gave it grandeur, genealogy, structure, ordering the Pantheon. Later dramatists gave it irony, philosophers, doubt, but always Olympus remained serene, radiant, gently detached, a symbol of ultimate power and beauty. Today the mountain still stands, untouched by time. People, of course, hike it in sturdy boots with trail mix and GPS. They reach the summit and see the land stretch far in all directions. The Aegean Sea in the distance, the fields below like faded mosaics. But they find no temples, only wind and sky, and a sense of something ancient, quietly watching. The gods may no longer live there, but their stories linger in the air, like echoes of bygone eras. And perhaps as the sun sets over the crags and shadows lengthen like old wine, one can close their eyes and faintly hear laughter carried on the breeze. A harp, a voice, a divine step, something not quite gone, something that lives on in myths and legends, awaiting a new listener to reawaken the ancient tales. And so, with a light step and a serene heart, one can depart from Olympus. The gods have already gathered at their majestic table, Torches illuminate their abode, and myriad stars have begun to twinkle above the golden halls. The traveller can sleep peacefully, for they are in worthy company. Tonight's story begins with the distant rumble of thunder. However, this is not the ominous roar that heralds an approaching storm. No, this sound rolls slowly and steadily, like a celestial drumbeat, accompanied by a flash of lightning that appears more theatrical than threatening. It is known that when Zeus deigns to appear, he always prefers to create a suitable atmosphere. Zeus, the acknowledged king of the gods, the undisputed ruler of Olympus, lord of thunder, rain, and keeper of celestial order, is, incidentally, one of the most complex family personalities in all of mythology, which, considering his surroundings, says a great deal. But for now, let's not delve into his numerous scandals. First, let's imagine him as the ancient Greeks once did, seated high on his throne atop Olympus, clad in flowing white and gold robes, with a scepter in one hand, a lightning bolt in the other, and an expression that oscillates between stern authority and amused distraction. The air around him practically hums with emanating power. He is not merely a monarch. He is the embodiment of law, order, and cosmic balance, at least most of the time. Zeus did not inherit Olympus by sheer luck. His story is rooted in the distant past, long before the appearance of majestic temples, inspired poets, or reverent prayers. Born to the Titans, Cronus and Rhea, Zeus was the youngest of 6 children, and the only one not swallowed immediately after birth. Yes, swallowed. Cronus, their father, had the nasty habit of devouring his own offspring to avoid being overthrown. It was, undoubtedly, a parenting style typically listed under dysfunctional families. However, Rhea, being a shrewd mother, secretly whisked away baby Zeus and tricked Cronus by presenting him with a swaddled stone, which he rather unceremoniously swallowed whole. Meanwhile, Zeus grew up, hidden in a secluded cave on the island of Crete. He was raised by nymphs, suckled by a magical goat, and protected by divine warriors who clashed their spears to drown out his infant cries. A rather noisy, but nonetheless highly effective daycare. When Zeus reached adulthood, he did what any ambitious son of prophecy would do. He returned, tricked Cronus into disgorging his siblings, and led a divine rebellion known in history as the Titanomachy. For 10 years, the younger gods, the Olympians, battled the old order until Zeus hurled the final lightning bolt, decisively securing his victory. The Titans were cast into Tartarus, a sort of divine oblivion, and Olympus was claimed. That's how Zeus became king, not by birthright, but by his cunning, undeniable courage, and, it must be admitted, a flair for dramatic entrances. As king, Zeus was not just a figurehead. He governed the heavens, of course, but also oaths, hospitality, and justice. If anyone broke a sacred promise, it was Zeus they feared. If a stranger appeared at someone's door, they were offered food and drink in Zeus's name. He was very much the god of social cohesion, the one who held everything together, even if his own household often teetered on the brink of chaos. Now, if we may digress slightly, no discussion of Zeus is complete without mentioning, shall we say, his romantic entanglements. Zeus, it must be admitted, possessed a wandering eye and a penchant for amorous adventures, sometimes even taking animal form. His liaisons with mortal women and a considerable number of goddesses form a veritable catalogue of ancient myths. Sometimes he appeared to them as a handsome man, other times as a swan, a bull, or a shower of gold, anything to achieve his desires. These unions famously produced many of Greek mythology's greatest heroes: Heracles, Perseus, Helen of Troy, Minos, and so on, each born of a different mother, each destined for a unique fate, and each a small stitch in the grand tapestry of Zeus's legacy, though perhaps not the legacy Hera, his lawful wife, had in mind. Oh yes, Hera, queen of the gods, goddess of marriage, and the long-suffering spouse of Olympus's most prolific philanderer. Their marriage, being immortal, was anything but serene. Hera was majestic, intelligent, and fiercely proud. Zeus, for his part, loved her in his own way, but that didn't stop him from constantly testing the limits of her patience. If you imagine a family dinner where no one mentions the elephant in the room, and then Zeus transforms into that very elephant, you'll grasp the essence of their relationship. Their quarrels were legendary. Sometimes Hera tried to outwit or even overthrow her husband. Once she organized a rebellion among the Olympians, and Zeus had to be rescued by the 100-handed giant Briareus. Another time he hung her from the sky in golden chains as punishment. Not his finest moment, to be sure, but they always reconciled, or at least reached a temporary truce. Immortality is a very long time, after all. You get used to some things. However, Zeus's story is not just about pranks and lightning bolts. He was also the arbiter of cosmic balance. When mortals committed crimes or acted with hubris, that dangerous blend of pride and defiance, it was Zeus who passed judgment. He sent omens. He sent furies. He cast down the proud. But he also rewarded virtue. He upheld the sacred bonds of hospitality. And he listened to prayers. The ancient Greeks saw him as the great anchor of divine authority. His image adorned temples, coins, and statues throughout the ancient world. In Olympia, a colossal gold and ivory statue of Zeus sat in the great temple, crafted by the sculptor Phidias, and considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. He was not just a myth, he was a cultural cornerstone. And yet, there's something deeply human about him, isn't there? For all his lightning and grandeur, Zeus often behaved like an exasperated father trying to keep a house full of eccentric children from burning down during a storm. He meddled in Trojan politics. He weighed the fates of heroes in battle. He tried, often in vain, to maintain order on Olympus. It was, without a doubt, a divine soap opera, and Zeus was both its director and its reluctant leading man. He could be merciful, for instance, forgiving Prometheus after centuries of punishment for stealing fire for humanity, and he could be vengeful, as when he flooded the earth to cleanse it of human wickedness. But above all, Zeus was consistent in one respect. He reminded mortals of the limits of their reach. In the myths, those who challenged him, be they giants or kings, almost always fell, not because Zeus necessarily hated them, but because the natural order had to be preserved, and order was what Zeus valued most. In the post-Titan world, the universe was no longer chaos and darkness. It had a rhythm, changing seasons, laws. Stars spun in the heavens, rains came and went, cities rose and fell, but the heavens remained constant. And somewhere high above it all, Zeus watched tirelessly. Now, it's easy to imagine him as simply a tyrant with a lightning bolt. However, it seems more fitting to consider him as something more complex, a divine figure who bore the weight of the world's unpredictability on his shoulders. as one who stood between the mortal realm and the unknown beyond, as one who roared and wept and raged not because he was cruel, but because the world was full of choices, and none of them were ever simple. Even gods had their burdens. Therefore, when his image appears before your mind's eye, let it be not only with power in his gaze, but also with the weariness lurking behind it. For though he was king, his reign was never peaceful. There was always a new hero to observe, a new war to pass judgment on, a new prophecy to ponder. And all the while the wind changed, the clouds gathered, and somewhere below, a poet whispered his name. Tonight the thunder is distant, the sky serene. Zeus rests in his magnificent hall, the firelight reflecting in his crown, and the world is at peace for a moment. Stars twinkle overhead like ancient eyes, and the mountain breathes its slow, eternal rhythm. Now you may rest. You are under the watchful eye of the king of Olympus, and tonight he is merciful. Settle in comfortably. The lamps are dimmed, the fire is quiet, and tonight our attention turns to Hera, queen of the gods. You've already met her husband Zeus in all his thunderous, shape-shifting glory. But Hera is something else entirely. Not a ruler of the skies, nor a master of storms or prophecies, but the quiet, steady heart of Olympus. And more than once, she has been the source of a stare so sharp it could turn a lesser deity to stone, or at least send them scurrying to some minor temple in Thessaly. Hera, the great goddess, has always embodied marriage, womanhood, well-being in childbirth, and the majesty of queenship. However, her image is far from a simple domestic idyll. Her character was not soft like a spring breeze. On the contrary, she was the embodiment of fierceness, unyielding resilience, sharp wit, and an incredible ability to openly express her deep displeasure, especially when it came to her husband's countless transgressions. We will address these episodes later. First and foremost, it is fitting to address the origins of her being. Her birth preceded the erection of majestic Olympus. Hera came into being as the child of the mighty Titans Cronus and Rhea. Yes, that same Cronus who was known for his rather disturbing and grim habit of swallowing his own offspring whole. Like her siblings, Hestia, Demeter, Hades and Poseidon, Hera found herself imprisoned within her parents' belly until Zeus, the youngest and most astute of them, brought about their salvation. Usually, the process of rebirth is not associated with an act of digestion. However, mythological traditions rarely burden themselves with such conventions and subtleties. After Zeus liberated his siblings and overthrew the old world order, Hera reappeared. Although she was younger than her brother and future husband, such were the family ties in ancient myths, she quickly established her position not only as a wife, but also as a full co-ruler, possessing equal divine authority. Her role transcended the mere title of Zeus's consort. She was the true queen of Olympus, crowned by right. But how did they meet? Zeus, as might be expected, pursued her with a force comparable to thunderclaps, yet Hera, distinguished by her sharp mind and foresight, was in no hurry to succumb to his charms. She persistently rejected his advances, maintaining her distance until he resorted to one of his most extraordinary tactics of seduction. Taking the form of a helpless cuckoo, he, trembling and pathetic, landed on her lap. Moved by compassion, she gently caressed the bird, and at that very moment he transformed back into his true form, catching her off guard in classic divine style. By modern standards, such an approach could hardly be called romantic, but in the context of the mythological world, this act was perceived almost as a poetic outpouring of feelings. Nevertheless, their marriage was far from ideal. Hera, herself the patroness of marital bonds, found herself tied to a husband whose fidelity was as unreliable as a chariot missing a wheel. Zeus's numerous affairs with mortal women, nymphs, and even other goddesses became the subjects of countless legends and dramatic stories. Each time he broke his marital vows, Hera responded not with silent resignation or subservience. Her answer was vengeance, calculated, precise, and often characterized by astonishing, almost poetic ingenuity. However, we must be objective. Hera's fury was never a manifestation of blind, unrestrained rage. Its roots lay deep in her sense of self-worth, in an unwavering conviction of what was right, sacred, and just. She never acted without good reason. When she embarked on retribution, her actions were imbued with the quiet confidence of a queen, striving to restore order to a realm seemingly on the verge of collapsing into chaos. As an illustration, consider the tale of Io, a mortal priestess who caught Zeus's eye. When Hera grew suspicious, Zeus, panicked, quickly transformed Io into a white heifer. Hera, of course, instantly saw through this simple trick. With feigned graciousness, she accepted the cow as a gift and entrusted its guardianship to Argus, a giant with 100 eyes. The move was far from subtle, but exceptionally effective. Zeus, in despair, sent Hermes with instructions to lull Argus to sleep with enchanting stories and melodies. And as soon as all 100 eyes closed in deep slumber, Hermes mercilessly slew the guardian. Hera was enraged. She took the unfortunate cow maiden Io and transferred Argus's many eyes to the tail of her sacred bird, the peacock. This striking detail persists in the bird's plumage to this day. This was characteristic of Hera. She did not forget. She immortalized events. She took the insults inflicted upon her and carved them into the stars, onto feathers, onto stone, not out of pure malice, but from an unyielding principle. Her world was built on order, and when that order was disturbed, she responded with all due resolve. Another very telling narrative involves Heracles, one of Zeus's many sons, by another woman. Hera harbored an implacable hatred for him from the moment of his birth. She sent venomous snakes into his cradle. She drove him to fits of madness. She placed obstacles at every turn. And yet, by an almost incredible, perfectly ironic twist of fate, it was Heracles who, after his death, was welcomed onto Olympus and reconciled with Hera. Moreover, he even married her daughter Hebe. One can only imagine how strained their family dinners must have been. However, Hera was not merely a wrathful spouse. Such a portrayal is an oversimplification and deeply unfair. She was the goddess to whom women offered prayers for easy childbirth, for a strong and stable home, for the preservation of the sacred bonds of marriage. She acted as a protector and patroness of queens. Her temples were considered among the most magnificent in all of Greece, particularly the Grand Heraion near Argos, where priestesses performed complex rituals and dedicated their lives to her service. Furthermore, she was the living embodiment of royal dignity. When Homer describes her in his epic Iliad, it is with a special, almost reverent awe. The reader sees a tall, proud figure with eyes shining like gold. She sits in a chariot drawn by majestic peacocks. A crown radiating celestial fire gleams on her head, and her voice possesses the power to silence an entire chamber full of immortal gods. Even Zeus, for all his arrogance, knew perfectly well when it was necessary to exercise caution in dealing with Hera. Their marital union, despite all internal strife, represented not only a personal but also a political bond, serving as a symbol of cosmic balance. Zeus embodied raw power and law, while Hera symbolized fidelity, strict structure, and sacred traditions. Together, they governed not only Olympus, but also the entire complex structure of the Greek cosmos. Their numerous quarrels were certainly part of the myths, but they also reflected the eternal struggle between freedom and devotion, chaos and order, impulsiveness and restraint. Worship of her did not mean adoration of gentleness. It symbolized reverence for strength clothed in dignity. It meant recognizing that the world needs not only storms but also clear boundaries. That love is not always sweet. Sometimes it manifests in fierceness, in pain, in unyielding resilience. Sometimes it is expressed in determination, when one grits their teeth and keeps moving forward for something far greater than oneself. Her character also encompassed acts of compassion. She supported Jason and his Argonauts. She carefully watched over women in childbirth. She empowered those who stood for justice. In some mythological traditions, she appears as a maternal figure, not soft but possessing unyielding firmness, like a mother who might not kiss your scraped knees, but would unhesitatingly stand between you and a charging bull. In art, she is almost always depicted majestically. She is shown enthroned with a scepter in one hand and a lotus staff, or pomegranate in the other. The pomegranate, as many may recall, symbolizes fertility and the continuous cycle of life, often found in ancient depictions of divine power. Among her sacred animals, besides the peacock, the cow stands out, not only for its docility, but also for its deep connection to nurturing and unyielding resilience. It is no coincidence that the Romans named her Juno and elevated her to the rank of the principal goddess of their Pantheon. The archetype of Hera, the divine matron, both awe-inspiring and deeply revered, finds its reflection in countless cultures. She is not one of those goddesses whose image fades with time. She is one who transcends and outlives it. And so we envision her now, seated in her shining hall, high above the fluffy clouds, where the golden light of Olympus softly rests upon her brow. Peacocks silently pace at her feet. Hearths crackle. A divine scroll rests beside her. Perhaps it's a new list of grievances, or perhaps a wedding invitation, or perhaps both at once. The gods around her argue and bicker, laugh and sulk, but Hera remains motionless, filled with vigilance. She is not always the first to speak, but when she does, all of Olympus listens. Tonight her gaze is calm, her court is silent. Somewhere in the mortal world a wedding is taking place. A new life is born. An oath is kept, and the Queen of the Heavens, for now, is at peace. Let the traveller now find repose. He rests under her watchful eye, for she never forgets anything. Even today, the vast expanse of the sea holds an ancient silence, a deep, breathing presence hidden beneath its surface. This grandeur is never entirely calm, never fully asleep, and in this boundless, eternal blue, long before sailors navigated by stars or merchants dreamed of distant shores, the ancient Greeks firmly believed that there in the depths dwelt something primal, something powerful, full of pride and at times quite capricious. This was Poseidon, brother of Zeus and Hades, lord of the sea, earthquakes, patron of horses, and most importantly, a god who did not forget slights. While Zeus reigned supreme over the heavens, and Hades held sway in the underworld, Poseidon claimed as his domain all that foamed, surged, churned, and crashed against the shores. The sea, after all, for the ancient Greeks, was not merely a body of water. It was a mighty force, an uncharted frontier, a profound mystery. And Poseidon was its undisputed sovereign. Imagine him now, tall, powerful, muscular, with a beard like a king weathered by countless storms, his hair tangled with sea salt and seaweed, and his trident gleaming with the wet sheen of dawn tides. He does not float above the clouds like his brother. He rides the crests of waves pulled by hippocampi, mythical seahorses with hooves of foam and manes like river reeds. When he speaks, his words sound like the low rumble of tectonic plates shifting beneath one's feet. He is the voice of the seabed itself, ancient, booming, and not particularly patient. His realm stretches immeasurably. It includes not only the sea itself, but every bay, every spring, and every underground stream. Sailors offered him prayers before long voyages. Fishermen whispered his name over their nets. Even land dwellers, living far from the coast, feared his wrath. Earthquakes, which the Greeks called Poseidon shaking the earth, were considered his doing. He is not one of those gods who politely warns of his displeasure. Like his siblings, Poseidon emerged from the deepest darkness. He, along with his brothers and sisters, was swallowed by Cronus and later freed by Zeus. After the Titanomachy, the brutal war against the elder gods, the world was divided into three spheres of influence. Zeus took control of the boundless sky. Hades received the gloomy underworld. Poseidon, meanwhile, was given the sea, and it was by no means a consolation prize. It was a domain equal in its grandeur and terrifying power. And frankly, the role suited him well. Poseidon's temperament was, to put it mildly, volatile. On some days he was benevolent, appearing as the god who granted calm winds, safely guided ships home, and drew fresh water from dry land. On others, he revealed himself quite differently. He could stir the sea into a furious frenzy, send colossal waves crashing onto unsuspecting shores, and summon sea monsters vast enough to swallow entire cities. He wasn't cruel, but he possessed an extremely short fuse. The sea ultimately both gives and takes, and so did he. One of his most famous fits of rage was directed at the city known today as Athens. The thing is, Poseidon and his niece Athena both vied to be its patron deity. The gods proposed a contest. Each was to present a gift, and the people would choose which god to honor. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident and created a spring, but to his dismay, the water was salty, not very useful on land. Athena, meanwhile, offered the olive tree, a symbol of peace, prosperity, and quite useful for cooking. The Athenians, always practical, chose her. Poseidon, in his classic manner, did not take defeat gracefully. In retaliation, he flooded part of the land, and though things eventually settled, it became clear that losing was not something he tolerated with elegance. His relationships, much like his temper, were turbulent. he married a sea goddess named Amphitrite, one of the 50 Nereids. Initially she fled his advances, which involved a fair bit of chasing and the help of a dolphin. Yes, it's true. But eventually she relented, and they entered into what, by Olympian standards, was a relatively stable marriage. Their son, Triton, was half human, half fish, and often depicted blowing a conch shell to soothe or summon the waves. Yet Poseidon was not the most faithful of husbands. His list of lovers and offspring rivals Zeus's, and includes mortals, nymphs, and even creatures he created himself. Among his most famous children is the winged horse Pegasus, born from the severed neck of Medusa after Poseidon, rather unceremoniously, pursued her in Athena's temple. There's also Polyphemus, the Cyclops who famously ran afoul of Odysseus, but more on that later. Poseidon's power was immense, but not always respected, especially by heroes who should have known better. Take Odysseus, for example. After blinding Polyphemus during his long journey home from Troy, he made the fatal mistake of taunting the Cyclops, whose father, of course, was Poseidon. This turned what should have been a 10-day sail into a 10-year epic filled with shipwrecks, sirens, and offended gods. The lesson: never anger the one who controls your travel plans. However, Poseidon was also a builder. He helped construct the walls of Troy. Although when the king refused to pay him properly, Poseidon made sure the city would one day fall. Again, we return to the theme of divine memory. The Olympians, especially Poseidon, had long memories and an even longer sense of justice when they felt slighted. Worship of Poseidon was widespread in coastal regions. The Isthmus of Corinth housed one of his main temples, a magnificent structure where sailors and seafarers made sacrifices for safe passage. Horses were sacred to him, not just seahorses, but terrestrial ones too. It was said he created the first horse by striking the earth with his trident. In some myths, he is even credited with teaching humanity how to harness their power. A reminder that Poseidon, though wild, could be generous when properly revered. But the sea is not merely geography. For the Greeks it was a living presence. It connected lands, carried myths, swallowed empires. And Poseidon was its voice, never predictable, but always aware. His temples stood open to the wind. His statues gazed out, towards the horizon. The sea was his, and the space between them was too. He was also deeply involved in the origin stories of many islands. Greek mythology is full of tales of Poseidon raising lands from the sea or smashing them apart in fits of rage. The island of Delos, sacred to Apollo and Artemis, was said to have once floated freely across the Aegean until Poseidon anchored it in place. There were also times when he created land, new shores emerging as a sign of his power. At festivals, Poseidon's worshippers did not always utter their prayers in gentle tones. Sacrifices were often made with a mixture of fear and awe. In some coastal areas, entire horses were driven into the sea as offerings, not out of cruelty, but because Poseidon's hunger was believed to match the size of his domain. He was not a demigod, not a gentle god. He was primal, elemental. Even the Romans, who called him Neptune, retained this vision of a mighty, ocean-bound deity. His image persisted across empires, carved in stone, etched on coins, guiding ships long after belief. In him faded. The sea, after all, does not easily forget its god. Let us imagine him now, in his underwater palace of coral and pearls. The walls shimmer with light filtered through the ocean's depths. Sea nymphs glide past like shadows. The echo of Triton's conch horn faintly drifts from distant caves. Poseidon himself sits on a throne of rock and shell, gazing out over his domain, silent but not still, never still. He does not often speak, but when he does, the waters respond. Perhaps he watches the mortals sailing above him, their sails full of borrowed wind, their ships no more than fragile bones in the deep. Perhaps he lets them pass, or perhaps he sends a slight ripple, just a reminder that he is there, not cruel, this God, but not forgetful either. He embodies the sea, vast, changeable, integral, God of storms and silences. And for the Greeks, he was not to be blindly loved, but absolutely respected. So tonight, as you drift into slumber, let the rhythm of the waves soothe your mind. The ocean has its stories, old and echoing, and far below Poseidon rests, not sleeping, but listening. Sleep peacefully. The sea is calm tonight, and he permits it. Beneath the world we know, beneath the roots of mountains and the drifting ocean floor, lies a place older than memory, darker than night, and quieter than time. It is not a place of fire, though later ages would say so. And it is not a prison. It is simply what comes next. The Greeks called it the underworld, and in its quiet center sits Hades, god of the dead. Hades, the eldest son of Cronus and Rhea, did not rule Olympus. He did not hurl thunder or stir the seas. His power did not flare. It endured. When the world was divided among the liberated brothers after the defeat of the Titans, Zeus drew the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades, without protest, accepted the land beneath the earth. Some say he was unlucky. Others say he chose it. In truth, Hades never needed spectacle to be sovereign. He simply was. He is a god of silence, not of absence, not of cruelty, but of silence. In the myths he rarely shouts or boasts. He acts deliberately, with weight. Mortals feared him, yes, but they also respected him. Not because he brought death, he did not, but because he received it. Because all roads eventually lead to him. His realm is vast, layered like the roots of a great tree. The dead arrive by way of Hermes, who gently guides them down. At the threshold awaits Charon, the ferryman, demanding his coin. It is for this reason that the Greeks placed obols in the mouths of their dead. To be unpaid was to wander forever on the banks of the Styx, unheard and unmourned. And the Styx is but one of many rivers. There is the Acheron, river of pain, the Cocytus, river of lamentation, the Phlegethon, which burns without consuming, and the Lethe, river of forgetfulness, whose waters lull the mind. Each river marks a transition, not just in distance, but in meaning. They flow not through geography, they flow through memory, through fear, through hope. The dead are judged by three ancient kings, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iacchus. Most souls are sent to the asphodel meadows, where they drift in serene tranquility, unremarkable, undisturbed. Some, the wicked, descend to Tartarus, the deepest abyss, where punishment fits the crime. And the rare few, the most noble, ascend to the Elysian fields, a place of music, sunlight, and gentle breezes, where even in death the virtuous can breathe freely. This realm, under Hades' rule, operates not on fiery chaos, but on strict order. The lord of this world is neither cruel nor overly kind. His main task is to ensure the unwavering observance of what must be. Every soul must be received, remembered, and assigned its place. There is undeniable dignity in this process. Yet, despite this fundamental role, Hades is often misunderstood. In art and ancient lore, he is sometimes mistakenly portrayed as a villain. Perhaps this is because the very idea of death evokes fear, and he is its personification. However, Hades is no more evil than the force of gravity. He does not pursue souls, nor tempt them, nor torment them. He patiently and steadily rules over the inevitable. The most famous myth associated with Hades is, of course, that of Persephone. This story begins under bright sunlight, among fragrant flowers. Persephone, daughter of Demeter, goddess of fertility and harvest, was gathering flowers in a field when the earth suddenly split open. Hades, appearing in his obsidian chariot, carried her down into the depths of the world. Demeter, consumed by grief, searched the entire earth, refusing to let crops grow until her daughter returned. Ultimately, a compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of the year on the surface with her mother, and part below with her husband. Thus the seasons came into being. Spring and summer became symbols of joy, while autumn and winter represented sorrow. Was it love, or an act of power? The myths diverge on this, but in the underworld, Persephone attained the status of queen. She was neither captive nor mere consort, but a full co-ruler. She sat beside Hades, not behind him. She guided the deceased past the judgment seat, tended the pale gardens of shadows, and Hades was not tempestuous. He did not engage in deceit. In all the legends, he is perhaps the only god who does not lie or cheat. His kingdom was enough, his crown was enough, his queen was enough. He is often called Pluto, meaning the rich one, for everything beneath the earth belongs to him. Gold, silver, precious stones, seeds in the soil, not only endings but also beginnings, stem from him. Seeds must dwell in darkness before they sprout, and Hades rules that darkness. He rarely appeared among the other gods. When he did, there was always good reason. He assisted in the war against the giants. He lent his helm of darkness to Perseus, who used it to escape after slaying Medusa. But mostly he kept to himself, watching, waiting, tending to his domain. His presence was felt in the rituals of mourning, in the rustle of grave goods, in the silence after the last breath. Sacrifices to Hades were made at night using black animals. Smoke was sent downwards. His name was whispered or not spoken at all. To name him was to attract his gaze, and that was heavy. And yet, not everyone feared him. Hades' name was part of mysterious rites promising rebirth. In Orphic traditions, he was not an end but a gatekeeper to the next beginning. Some even believed in cycles of life and death, in reincarnation. And Hades stood not as a wall, but as a door. Imagine him now, if you will, seated on a throne of volcanic rock, surrounded by shadows, his robes falling in quiet folds. Around him the shades of the long-departed shimmer, speaking in whispers only the dead understand. Beside him, Persephone tends a garden of pale flowers that bloom without sun. The air faintly smells of myrrh and memory. He holds a scepter not to strike, but to denote order. The dead do not rise. They need no chains. They are held by the very weight of time. Unlike his brothers, Hades does not crave glory. He does not envy Olympus. He does not meddle in mortal affairs unless they trespass into his domain without permission. And even then, he is more judge than executioner. He sets the terms. He enforces them. Recall Orpheus, who came to plead for Eurydice. Hades listened. He agreed. He gave the poet a chance to lead her out on one condition: do not look back. And when Orpheus did, Hades took no more than was due him. There was no trickery, only rules. In a world where even gods could be petty, Hades was consistent. Perhaps that is why, for all his aloofness, he was trusted. Feared, yes, but also trusted. And so the Greeks lived, always mindful of him, not in terror, but in recognition. They carefully built tombs. They left offerings. They remembered names, because to be remembered was to linger a little longer in the world above. Tonight, as you settle into sleep, you need not fear the God below. He does not wait in your shadow. He watches over those who have already gone. He guards a realm not of fire, but of memory. He sits in silence, for there is nothing more to prove. Sleep now. Let the earth hold you gently. Let your thoughts drift like leaves on the Acheron. Let the quietness of that calm realm lull you. Hades waits, but not for you. Not yet. He waits only as the world turns, and so it always will. Wisdom and strategy of Athena. They say she was not born in the usual way, but from a headache, and quite a severe one at that. Zeus, the story goes, swallowed her mother, Metis, the goddess of wisdom, because it was prophesied that she would bear a child more powerful than he. Problem solved, he thought. But divine digestion is rarely the end of the story in Greek myths. One day, Zeus began to suffer from an unbearable pain in his skull. The gods gathered. Suggestions were made. Eventually, Hephaestus, ever practical, struck Zeus's head with an axe, and out sprang Athena, fully grown and fully armed, with a spear in one hand and a shield in the other, letting out a battle cry that echoed across Olympus. A dramatic entrance, even by divine standards. Athena, goddess of wisdom, military strategy, crafts, and reason, appeared not as a child, but as an idea incarnate, balanced, calm, and already thinking 3 moves ahead. She wore a helmet, carried Zeus's aegis, and from her first breath commanded the respect of gods and mortals. Her presence on Olympus was unique. Unlike many of her peers, Athena was not known for tumultuous love affairs or dramatic squabbles over vanity. Though she was not entirely above such things, she was measured, demanding, and quite fond of logic. In a realm of passion and power, she was the embodiment of principle. Yet she was not cold. She simply saw the long game. Cities and civilizations adored her. The most famous, of course, Athens itself, took her name. The contest between Athena and Poseidon for patronage of the city is one of those stories that reveals as much about Greek values as it does about the gods themselves. Poseidon, being who he was, offered a grand gift, He struck the earth and produced a spring of salt water, or, in some versions, a warhorse. Either way, impressive, but not terribly useful for the inhabitants of a rocky, inland city. Athena, ever pragmatic, planted an olive tree, shade, food, oil, and timber, all from one gift. The Athenians chose her, and honestly, who wouldn't? From then on, Athena became more than a goddess to them. She was the guardian of their identity, their sense of civic pride, their aspiration to reason, art, and just warfare. Her temple, the Pantheon, still crowns the Acropolis. Its columns gaze out over the Aegean, like marble sentinels. It remains not just a relic of ancient architecture, but a testament to her enduring spirit. Athena's approach to war was nothing like Ares' bloodlust. She preferred tactics, planning, the application of intellect to conflict. She represented reason in battle, not madness. She advised heroes rather than charging into the fray herself. Odysseus, in particular, earned her favor. His cunning, his resourcefulness, his talent for words over weapons, all these qualities she valued. She guided him home through storms and strife, always the voice of reason whispering amidst the chaos. But wisdom is not always gentle. Athena could be uncompromising, and when offended, her anger was cold and long-lasting. Take the story of Arachne, a mortal weaver whose skill was so great she dared claim superiority over the goddess herself. Athena, not one to tolerate hubris, challenged her to a contest. Arachne's tapestry was flawless, even daringly depicting the gods in their less flattering moments. Athena, though impressed, tore it to shreds. She cast Arachne down, but in a rare moment of mercy or poetic judgment, transformed her into the first spider to weave forever. This balance of pride and precision defined Athena. She upheld honor, but never shied from asserting her place. She didn't shout. She didn't scheme. She simply stood her ground and others yielded. She was also the patroness of crafts and invention. Pottery, weaving, architecture all fell under her guidance. She inspired not just warriors, but artisans, philosophers, and lawmakers. Her symbol, the owl, denoted keen sight and was stamped on the coins of Athens. Wherever thoughtful hands worked, shaping the world, Athena was there. Artists uttered her name before carving marble. Statesmen offered silent prayers before debating laws. The quiet majesty of Athena. It is notable that Athena, this powerful goddess, forever maintained her virginity, a choice dictated not by prim prudishness, but by a deep and unyielding independence. She never married, pursued no romantic attachments, and yielded to no one's advances. Her devotion was rooted in unshakable principles, not ephemeral passions. This granted her a unique clarity of mind and unwavering stability, unclouded by the usual romantic entanglements that often ensnared her divine peers. She stood apart, and it was from this proud solitude that her incomparable strength flowed. Even her closest friends knew to be cautious in her presence. When the blind prophet Tiresias accidentally saw her bathing, Athena, without hesitation, deprived him of his sight. However, in fairness, she immediately gifted him with the power of prophecy in return, to restore balance. Firm, yet just. Such was her unchanging path. In works of art, Athena is almost always depicted with weapons, yet never appears aggressive. Her shield often bore the head of Medusa, a grim trophy presented by Perseus after his fateful quest. According to some traditions, Athena assisted him, guiding his hand, providing necessary tools, and whispering words of courage. However, her decision to place Medusa's visage on her shield had a deeper meaning. Perhaps it was a warning, or a reminder that true wisdom does not recoil from horror. It absorbs it, reflects it, and skillfully uses it for its own purposes. Numerous temples dedicated to Athena were scattered throughout the Greek world. Beyond the legendary Parthenon, sanctuaries in iconic places like Delphi and Sparta revered her many aspects: the warrior, the lawmaker, the protector of cities. Festivals like the Pantheon celebrated her birth and her pivotal role in civic life, combining athletic contests, solemn sacrifices, and parades, showcasing intricately woven garments created in her honor. In one such ritual, young women carried offerings in reverent silence, their steps measured, their robes flowing like water under the shade of olive trees. Her many epithets eloquently attest to the breadth of her influence. Athena Parthenos, the maiden; Athena Polias, patroness of the city; Athena Primachos, she who fights in the front line; Athena Ergane, patroness of crafts and labor; Athena Nike, bringer of victory. She was a multifaceted goddess, but never distant or inaccessible. Even in myths, she appears as the goddess most inclined to walk alongside mortals, speak plainly, and guide without the slightest hint of condescension. She saw potential where others saw only flaws. She offered wise counsel, not flattery; demanded effort, not indulgence. Of course, there were some seeming contradictions in her character. She steadfastly upheld justice, yet at times remained silent when her fellow gods acted with less noble intentions. She punished women who dared to overstep boundaries, yet empowered heroes to challenge fate itself. However, perhaps this was precisely her profound wisdom, knowing when to act and when to bide her time. Not every wrong required immediate correction with a shout. Some problems could be rectified over time through silence, with a long-term perspective. Athena always saw the distant future. She rarely raised her voice, but when she did, her speech resonated like clear judgment, like bronze clanging against bronze in the still air before battle. It was a single piercing note that could not be ignored. Her advice was often laced with quiet warnings, gently spoken truths. In the council of the gods they might argue for hours, but when Athena began to speak, a complete silence fell in the hall. Her logic was not easily refuted. Her presence was impossible to ignore. Imagine her now, seated on her marble throne high in the majestic halls of Olympus. Her eyes are cool and calm, carefully scanning the scrolls of mortal deeds. She rarely smiles, but when her lips curve, it is the smile of one who sees potential, not perfection. Her owl sits silently beside her, and outside the stars revolve in precise, prescribed order. Every movement above reflects her mind below, quiet, deliberate, constant. Somewhere below, a child learns to trace letters. A potter spins his wheel. A general marks a map. A philosopher pauses mid-thought, wondering where this sudden insight came from. And in all of this, Athena manifests herself. She is not the brightest of the gods, nor the loudest, but she is the one whose name is whispered in libraries and courts, in war rooms and workshops. She is wisdom, embodied in bronze. And tonight, as you close your eyes and drift into slumber, know that she is awake, not in thunder or fire, but in thought, in structure, in the still strength of what is rightly built. Sleep now, and if you dream, let it be of olive groves and marble halls, clear skies and steady hands. Athena is near, and she is thinking. The twins of divine harmony, Apollo and Artemis. In the soft light of pre-dawn twilight, when the world pauses and the sky hovers between shades of silver and gold, two majestic figures move through the fabric of myth. Twins born of the same mother, destined to walk entirely different paths under the same ancient sky. Apollo and Artemis, the embodiment of sun and moon, brother and sister, both opposites and echoes of each other. Their birth occurred on the sacred island of Delos, a place that, according to tradition, once drifted freely in the vast sea until it anchored itself at the opportune moment to shelter their mother, Leto. Hera, always consumed by vengeance and utterly intolerant of Zeus's numerous love affairs, forbade any land from receiving Leto while she was pregnant. Delos, being unattached and wild, was not bound by such strict rules, and so on this shifting ground, under the curious gaze of the sky, Leto first gave birth to Artemis, and then to Apollo. From the very beginning, it was clear they were no ordinary children. Artemis, it is said, helped her brother come into the world, and thus became the goddess of childbirth and protector of the young. Apollo, radiant and golden-haired, arrived second, but soon became the embodiment of light, music, poetry, prophecy, and healing. Such an impressive list of talents might make even Hermes blink in surprise. These two were close in blood, but different in spirit. Artemis chose the wild, the forests, the mountains, the creatures of the night. She roamed with a bow and a pack of hounds, untouched by civilization, inaccessible to men, a true virgin goddess. Her strength lay in independence, her power in detachment. She guarded liminal spaces, twilight, dense thickets, the edge between worlds. Apollo, by contrast, preferred the center, sunlight, the lyre, the steps of temples warm from the afternoon heat. He ruled order and clarity, truth spoken by oracles, the measured rhythm of poetry. The clean line of sculpture. Where Artemis roamed beneath the canopy, Apollo strode through city squares, head held high, every step in rhythm. And yet, they remained mirrored reflections of each other. Where he brought the day, she sketched the night. Where he offered reason, she held mystery. They did not oppose each other, but completed a single circle of being. Apollo's most famous sanctuary was at Delphi, where the Pythia, his oracle, sat on a tripod and delivered his prophecies, often in enigmatic form, weaving fate and free will into a single unbreakable thread. Pilgrims from across the Greek world came to ask their questions and receive their mysterious answers. And while these answers were sometimes frustratingly vague, Apollo's gift was not in simplicity but in profound insight. He was also an unparalleled musician. His lyre, given to him by Hermes as an apology for a rather audacious cattle theft, became a symbol of celestial harmony. With it he could calm storms, soothe minds, and sway hearts. His songs were not mere entertainment. They were structure, soul, the cosmos turned into melody. But Apollo was not only light. His stories, like those of all Olympians, also carry shadows. He loved often and sometimes disastrously. Daphne, a nymph who fled him, was transformed into a laurel tree to escape his pursuit. Coronis, whom he loved, betrayed him, and he killed her to save their unborn child, Asclepius, the god of medicine. His wrath was precise, his grief prolonged. Artemis, too, had her shadows. She ruthlessly punished those who saw her without her consent. Actaeon, a hunter, stumbled upon her bathing and was turned into a stag, torn apart by his own hounds. She was fiercely protective, unyielding in her expectations, but she was also kind to those who respected her solitude. She guarded the vulnerable, walked with maidens, lent her strength to women in childbirth, and was invoked in the quiet of moonlit prayers. Unlike her brother, Artemis did not build cities. Her temples were often deep in forests or on paths at the edge of cliffs. She preferred the company of nymphs, wild animals, and stars. And yet, her cult was widespread. From Ephesus to Brauron, from Arcadia to Sicily, girls danced in her honor, shedding their childhood names in rites of passage that whispered of transformation. Together, Apollo and Artemis represented more than just light and darkness. They were a pair of divine principles, reason and intuition, civilization and wilderness, speech and silence, the bow that hunted and the lyre that healed. And always, always, they remained brother and sister, never rivals, never strangers. In the annals of ancient tales, the story of the Gigantomachy, the grand confrontation between the Olympian gods and the mighty giants, is etched. In this epic battle, Apollo and Artemis, the brilliant divine twins, stood shoulder to shoulder. He, the radiant Apollo, unleashed torrents of arrows woven from blazing gold upon the enemies, carrying with them scorching light and destruction. She, the swift Artemis, struck down opponents with icy arrows of pure silver, piercing and relentless. Acting in complete unity, they managed to crush colossal foes whose size and power significantly surpassed their own. Their resolve remained unyielding, and their righteous cause imbued them with unprecedented strength. In that battle, the very light of the sun and the mysterious glow of the moon seemed to merge into a single invincible assault. Another ancient myth reveals the tragic story of the death of Niobe's children. This proud queen dared to mock the goddess Leto, reproaching her for having given birth to only 2 offspring, while her own progeny was numerous. Enraged by such a blatant insult, Artemis and Apollo immediately took up their bows, filled with divine wrath. Mercilessly, one by one, they struck down Niobe's children. Apollo slew her sons and Artemis, her daughters. Only in some versions of this grim tradition was one child miraculously spared. Niobe herself, consumed by inconsolable grief, fled weeping, and eventually turned to stone, becoming a silent testament to her endless sorrow, an eternal waterfall of tears. The lesson taught by this cruel act was unequivocal. One should never mock a mother who has given light and shadow to the world. However, these ancient tales were not merely formidable warnings intended to terrify mortals. They served rather as the finest mirrors, held up to the very depths of the human heart, to reflect how all-consuming passion, unshakable loyalty, and boundless power manifest in forms transcending ordinary life. Through these narratives, the Hellenes sought to comprehend and explore the complex structure of human emotions and sensations itself. Apollo and Artemis in their deeds were not limited to merely functioning as punishers or protectors. They also embodied and expressed divine facets inherent in our own inner worlds, becoming symbols of our aspirations and contradictions. It is noteworthy that Apollo, revered as the god of healing and light, was simultaneously a harbinger of plague and disease. A single note, drawn from the strings of his golden lyre, could bring deadly sickness, while another bestowed complete recovery and rebirth. Similarly, Artemis, the mighty goddess of the hunt, was both a giver of life and a patroness of the wild, as well as a relentless killer of animals. Both these divine twins held in their hands the very essence of paradox, like a taut bowstring, oscillating between two extremes of being. Historically, the cults of Apollo and Artemis played a defining role, shaping a significant part of the religious life of the ancient Greeks. In sacred Delphi, Apollo's famous oracle influenced fateful political decisions, guided sea voyages, and even predicted the outcome of wars, becoming a center of spiritual and state power. The Delian League, one of the most important alliances of city-states, was named after the island of Delos, the place where, according to tradition, Apollo was born. Athletes, preparing for the Pythian Games held every 4 years in his honor, took solemn oaths in the name of this god, seeking his favor and victory. Artemis, meanwhile, held a central place in rites marking the transition from childhood to adulthood. In Brauron, young girls approaching the prime of womanhood participated in special rituals, donning bear skins. This custom was an echo of Artemis's ancient role as guardian and patroness of all life transitions. Her sanctuary in Ephesus, striking with its massive temple and majestic statues adorned with symbols of fertility and wildlife, was rightly considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, testifying to her boundless significance. The Romans, adopting the cultural heritage of the Hellenes, also held these deities in deep reverence. Apollo, a relatively rare case in the Roman Pantheon, retained his name and essence, remaining Apollo, a symbol of the continuity and universality of his cult. Artemis, however, transformed into Diana, and her image continued to dwell in moonlit groves, preserving her wild, untouched nature and independent spirit. In works of art, Apollo is traditionally depicted as youthful, beardless, often with a lyre or bow in hand. His face radiates serenity, and his posture is perfectly balanced. He embodies the ideal of beauty, flawless balance, grace, and harmony. Artemis, on the other hand, is portrayed as swift and confident in her movements. Her garments flutter in the wind as she rushes, and her gaze is sharp, like the silver tip of her arrow piercing its target. Her image combines the unshakable stillness of a dense forest and the sudden sharp crack of a broken branch, symbolizing her dual nature. Let these divine twins now appear in your imagination, standing side by side at the very edge of creation. Apollo once again lifts the golden disk of the sun, and the celestial vault is flooded with its radiance. Birds begin to awaken, their gentle songs softly warming the morning air. Behind him, Artemis lowers the moon, hiding it in the approaching shadows. The stars, as if sighing, disappear. A deer treads silently through the morning mist, and between these two deities, the world gradually awakens to new life. They do not utter a word, for they do not need to. They perform their dance, which began with the creation of time. Apollo gazes eastward, where the day awaits with open arms. Artemis, meanwhile, turns westward into the deep silence of the forests, and for a brief moment their paths intersect, light and darkness, brother and sister, inextricably linked. Let peace now descend. Let the moonlight guide one to deep dreams. Let the last golden strings of Apollo's lyre gradually fade into the ensuing silence. The twins continue their eternal vigil, and for now, the world remains in a fragile but secure balance. Settle in comfortably. Let the clangor of battle gradually subside, and the clatter of hammers become less sharp. This evening, our attention will turn to two gods, so disparate in nature that they are rarely mentioned on the same page. And yet here they are, presented side by side in the imagination. One, the embodiment of fury with a sword, the other, fire directed towards a creative purpose. These are Ares and Hephaestus, the god of war and the god of the forge. Together they create a rather curious picture of masculinity in the context of ancient Greece. One is all muscle and blood, the other is lame but full of genius. And if ancient myths are to be believed, which of course is very much hoped for before drifting into sleep, the Olympian family didn't quite know how to handle either of them. Ares, the mighty son of Zeus and Hera, was the absolute embodiment of unrestrained, wild and destructive violence. He did not represent tactical warfare planned by generals or the cunning strategy characteristic of the goddess Athena. No, Ares was the roaring heart of battle, the surging war cry, the blind and reckless plunge into chaos. The Greeks called him Ares, and while they certainly respected the power he symbolized, they were by no means eager to invite him to a friendly feast. Even Zeus, his own father, remarkably, was known to have a very low opinion of his son. In Homer's epic, Iliad, Zeus explicitly calls Ares the most hateful of all gods, and this was not light banter over a cup of wine, but a sincere expression of deep disapproval. Ares embodied the kind of war that mindlessly scorched fertile fields and mercilessly laid cities to ruin, often without any good reason. He found true pleasure in the clang of bronze on bronze, in the panicked neighing of frightened horses, and in the death cries of dying warriors. His companions were equally repulsive and ominous. Phobos, fear; Deimos, terror; and Eris, discord. They relentlessly followed him into every battle, forming an entourage that no mortal would dare invite to a festive banquet. And yet, for all his ferocity and untamed nature, Ares was not particularly successful on the battlefield. He often suffered defeats in battles. Once he was even imprisoned in a bronze jar for several long months by two mortal sons of Poseidon. Yes, the god of war himself, confined in a vessel like pickled olives. This fact alone is enough to suggest that the ancient Greeks might have quietly chuckled at his ineptitude. However, it's worth comparing Ares' image with how the Romans perceived him. Mars, as they called this god, was deeply revered, respected, and worshipped with lavish parades and ceremonies. While the Greeks treated Ares with clear caution and even some apprehension, the Romans readily embraced him as a powerful symbol of disciplined military might and imperial grandeur. This curious shift in perception likely reflected the fundamental values of a rising military power versus a culture that favored wit, rational thought, and leisurely philosophical conversations in the shade of plane trees. And yet, for all his flaws, there is something almost attractive about Ares. He openly displays his unstoppable passion, unashamedly giving in to feelings. He falls in love, and oh, how madly he falls in love with Aphrodite, the very goddess of beauty and love. What an extraordinary pair they made, she, radiant and cunning, he, straightforward and recklessly in love. Their romance, though no great secret to the Olympians, was by no means subtle or discreet. Ultimately, they were caught in the act by Hephaestus, Aphrodite's lawful husband, who snared them in an ingenious net he had forged himself in his smithy. Now the narrative leads to the other god of this evening, the quiet but powerful smouldering force of the forge. Hephaestus, the divine smith, was the son of Hera, and depending on one's preferred mythological version, perhaps born without a father at all. Some traditions state that Hera bore him alone, driven by vengeance for Zeus having produced Athena from his own head. Such is Olympian parenthood, equal parts miracle and outright pettiness. However, Hephaestus was born lame, a serious flaw in the glittering society of Olympian gods, where beauty and strength were unquestioned standards. His physical imperfection sharply set him apart from the others. Myths regarding his fate diverge. In one version, Hera, disgusted by his ugliness, casts the infant from Olympus. In another, Zeus does so after some disagreement. In any case, the unfortunate youth falls from heavenly heights and crashes into the sea, where he is rescued and raised by kindly sea nymphs. One can imagine how awkward the subsequent family reunion might have been. But Hephaestus was not destined to remain forever in gloom and oblivion. He learned, he mastered his craft, and he created astonishing things. In time he returns to Olympus, but not with anger or a thirst for revenge, but with unparalleled skill. And what skill it was! He creates majestic thrones, wondrous automatons capable of movement, and opulent bronze palaces. He forges the legendary shield of Achilles, so intricate and detailed that poets had to dedicate hundreds of lines to its description. It is he who creates Pandora, the first woman, so artfully made that her beauty was truly irresistible. Hephaestus, in essence, is the patron of all invention and craft. His influence extends not only to the creation of swords and armor, but to every tool, every spark of progress shaped by human hands. Where Ares symbolizes destruction, Hephaestus embodies creation, passing through purifying flame. The hammer and anvil serve as his altar, where wonders are born. The ancient Greeks were well aware of this role. Throughout Greece, cults dedicated to Hephaestus existed, especially in Athens and on Lemnos, a volcanic island considered his earthly home. There the fires of the forges were sacred, and every smith was considered a kind of priest, echoing his divine patron in labour, sweat, and soot. In Athens, Hephaestus shared a temple with the goddess Athena, which represented not a romantic but a deeply symbolic combination. She provided wisdom, and he provided the means for its practical implementation. Thus, craftsmanship and cunning went hand in hand. And yet, for all his undeniable brilliance and genius, Hephaestus rarely achieves personal victories in mythological narratives. His marriage to Aphrodite is marred by her infidelity. His cunning traps, though ingenious, rarely resolve his deep loneliness. He possesses immense power, but he is not worshipped for his appearance or charm. Thus he appears as one of the most understandable gods, not shrouded in glory, but diligently working in the shadows, creating the world while others fight for it. And perhaps therein lies a profound meaning, because the ancient Greeks, for all their fervent love of myths and epic tales, were an exceptionally practical people. They built magnificent structures, they reasoned and analyzed. They held lively debates in the agora and laid stones in perfectly straight rows, creating the strong foundations of civilization. While Ares could only shout and brandish his sword, Hephaestus quietly and diligently forged the very loop, metaphorically speaking, upon which their entire world hung. Yet, despite all their differences, Ares and Hephaestus both belong to the same powerful divine family, and it's not hard to imagine that dinners served on sun-drenched Olympus were, to say the least, quite tense. Imagine the scene. Ares, god of war, proudly recounts blood-soaked battlefields and laurels of glory, while Hephaestus, the smith god, gloomily inspects an accidental burn mark on his latest sculpture. Hera, queen of the gods, simply sighs deeply, expressing her eternal displeasure. Apollo, god of light and music, draws a note of silent disapproval from his lyre. Dionysus, god of wine, generously refills everyone's goblets. Aphrodite, goddess of beauty, languidly admires her flawless reflection in a polished shield. And somewhere in the shadows, unnoticed, Hermes, messenger of the gods, quietly chuckles, enjoying the general commotion. But behind this mythological veil lies something far older and deeply revealing. These two deities embody the fundamental duality that any civilization inevitably faces and grapples with throughout its history. It is the opposition of brute force and creative function, destructive chaos and painstaking craft, the fire that mercilessly burns, and the fire that patiently builds. It's important to constantly remind ourselves that war, however often glorified in heroic poems, always remained a terrifying and ruthless reality. The ancient Greeks were no strangers to conflict. Their history is full of hoplite battles, incessant clashes between city-states, and massive Persian invasions. They witnessed firsthand the destructive power of war, and perhaps that is why Ares was kept at a respectful distance, as a necessary but by no means desirable force, never considered an honoured guest. In contrast, the creations of Hephaestus, the smith god, permeated every aspect of daily life. The plough tilling the earth, the spear defending the homeland, the loom's spindle providing clothing, the majestic columns of temples reaching for the sky, all bore echoes of his furious forge. To praise Hephaestus was to pay homage to civilization itself, its progress and achievements. In vase paintings and numerous statues, Hephaestus is traditionally depicted with powerful muscular arms, a face blackened with soot and grime, and a simple short working tunic. He does not radiate ethereal glow, his appearance lacks unearthly grace. He sweats, his muscles strained from heavy labor. He bends metal, giving it new form, and limps with unyielding determination. Ares, conversely, is the embodiment of sharp lines and dazzling bronze gleam. His helmet is adorned with a lavish plume, his shield always ready, his chin proudly lifted. His beauty is as meticulously forged as his sword, but somehow it always seemed less reliable and more deceptive. This is why the Greeks, wise in their understanding of the world, instructed their children, strength alone is not enough. Build, create with your hands. Let fire bring warmth, not consume everything around. And yet perhaps Ares' existence was inevitable. if only to constantly remind them of how priceless peace is. And Hephaestus, despite all his hardships and trials, remained utterly indispensable. Even the almighty gods ultimately needed their smith, capable of creating and mending. As consciousness descends into silence, it is fitting to ponder the forge whose soft light flickers in the night, surrounded by countless tools, unfinished wonders, and the unique scent of warm metal. There are no battle cries, no clang of spears, only the calming glow of the fire and the measured, slow rhythm of the hammer. Perhaps the true heart of Olympus beat not in the lavish throne room, but precisely in this forge, located deep beneath the mountain. And somewhere there, in the mountain halls, the god with a limp and an unyielding steel mind continues to shape the world, giving it new contours. While far above, the god of war, just in case, tirelessly sharpens his blade, anticipating future conflicts. Let the sparks now slowly die out. One by one, the flames in the forge dim. The clang of iron gradually fades, and the gods, always so imperfect in their grandeur, sink into silence as sleep approaches them. Close your eyes and let the strict rules of the waking world loosen their grip. Tonight, consciousness drifts with the tricksters, those who easily cross boundaries, blur familiar identities, and quietly chuckle when the map no longer matches the terrain. We descend from the polished marble steps of Olympus and step onto an ivy-covered path that carries the faint scent of wine, wildflowers, and something slightly forbidden. These are the gods of transition, of thresholds, of masks, of mischief and secrets, Dionysus and Hermes. One generously pours wine, the other subtly pilfers your sandals, and together they lead us to the very edges of what it means to be human. Let's begin with Dionysus. He can, of course, be considered the god of wine, which he undoubtedly is, but his essence is far deeper and more multifaceted. He is the god of liberation, madness, and ecstasy, a deity who teaches us to let go, to dissolve into the moment. He represents a paradox wrapped in ivy, simultaneously comforting and terrifying. The story of his origin is as convoluted as it should be for such a deity. Some myths tell that he was born of Semele, a mortal princess, and Zeus, who, in his classic manner, secretly visited her. But Semele, tricked by a jealous Hera, asked to see Zeus in his full divine form, and mortals, as is known, are not built to withstand the power of thunder. She perished in flames, and Zeus, in a very inventive act of divine obstetrics, saved the unborn Dionysus and sewed him into his thigh. Yes, that's not a mistake. Dionysus was reborn from Zeus's leg. It may not be the most elegant way to come into the world, but it is certainly unforgettable. From the moment of his unusual birth, Dionysus existed between worlds, mortal and divine, Greek and foreign, male and female, sane and beyond reason. He wandered the world, growing and evolving, and wherever he went, grapevines sprouted from the earth. Panthers followed him relentlessly. Women, known as maenads, danced barefoot in the forests, gripped by a wild possession of his presence. And behind all this unbridled joy there always lurked an ominous shadow of danger. Because Dionysus is not just the god of wine. He is the god of the very essence of what makes wine, the god of fermentation, of transformation. He is the one who unvarnishedly shows you who you really are, or perhaps who you desperately try not to be. For the ancient Greeks, Dionysus embodied the life force that breaks through all structures and boundaries. He was worshipped in ecstatic rites that sometimes took place at night, deep in forest thickets. The Orphic mysteries and Bacchanalia allowed initiates to free themselves from the shackles of identity, gender, class, duty, and for a moment taste the intoxicating freedom of dissolution. However, it was not always peaceful. Pentheus, the proud Theban king, attempted to suppress the cult of Dionysus. The god, disguised as a gentle priest, lured him to observe the women's rites. But Pentheus was torn apart, literally by his own mother, driven mad by divine power. And yet, Dionysus was never a villain. He represented a necessary balance. He came at the end of winter, heralding spring. He came after loss, bringing comfort and rebirth. He was the embodiment of the return of vitality, that wild, untamed joy that reminds us we are alive. And for all his chaos, he was deeply loved. Majestic temples were erected in his honor. Theatres were built in his name. The city Dionysia in Athens became the cradle of tragedy and comedy, a sacred celebration of the art of storytelling, masks, and the deepest human emotions. Because theatre, like Dionysus himself, constantly balances on the fine line between illusion and truth. Now turn away from the forest thicket and listen for the flutter of wings. Or is it just the rustle of sandals on marble? It's Hermes. If Dionysus teaches us to let go completely, Hermes, conversely, shows us how to navigate this chaos, how to manage it. He is the messenger god, the guide of souls, a trickster with such a sly grin that you immediately know he's already made off with what you're looking for. Hermes is the god of transitions, travel, trade, invention, and, of course, thievery. He is the protector of boundaries and at the same time one who easily slips through them. Born in a humble cave, he was already walking and stealing before the end of his first day. One of his very first acts was to steal Apollo's cattle. And he didn't just steal them, but artfully disguised his tracks by walking backward and crafting sandals from bark. By sunset of that same day he had invented the lyre, made from a tortoise shell and gut strings, and charmed Apollo to avoid punishment by offering him this instrument as a gift. Such is Hermes, quick, incredibly clever, and disarmingly charming enough to always get away with it. However, he was not merely a jester and prankster. Hermes played a vital role in Greek religion. He was the psychopomp, the guide of souls, the one who led the dead to the underworld. He did not judge, did not punish, but simply accompanied, a quiet but indispensable presence at the moment of death, not feared or worshipped too loudly, but always needed. For the ancients, Hermes was present at crossroads, at the boundaries between fields, in those liminal places where magic was believed to occur. Travellers left him offerings in the form of herms, stone pillars topped with his head, often with an anatomically prominent addition carved just below. They served as guardians of movement, symbols of fertility, and audacious reminders of divine presence in everyday life. Hermes was also the god of merchants, trade, negotiations, and, yes, occasional swindles. But in the ancient world this was considered part of the game. Trade was a sacred activity, and Hermes, always adaptable and resourceful, was both its protector and its jester. He appears everywhere, among coins, in plays, in dreams. A flash of winged sandals darting across the sky always heralded his arrival. And here's where it gets interesting. Because while Dionysus and Hermes are not often directly juxtaposed in myths, they are spiritual kin. Both are boundary deities. Both connect opposites, life and death, mortal and divine, order and chaos. They are gods of change, of transformation. And in the ancient world, change needed to be respected, and at times even feared, as it reminded people that the line between the civilized and the wild is thinner than we like to admit. In some Orphic traditions, Dionysus is associated with the rebirth of the soul, torn apart by the Titans and reborn in fire. Hermes, meanwhile, appears in esoteric texts as the keeper of hidden knowledge, later merging with the Egyptian Thoth to become Hermes Trismegistus, the father of alchemy and mystical arts. Between them, these two gods whisper a strange but profound truth, that transformation is divine, that the in-between state is sacred. The Greeks understood this intuitively. Their myths were not meant to be logically consistent. They were meant to reflect life itself, messy, contradictory, and beautifully uncertain. And so, when the festival of Dionysus was held, with its masks and madness, it wasn't just about wine. It was about freedom, about the profound sense that for one night the world could bend, and just perhaps you could completely let go. And when a traveller stepped onto a road, not knowing where it led, a prayer to Hermes was not just about reaching a destination, it was about protection in the unknown. A little luck, a little cunning, a little mischief, just enough to make any journey truly interesting. In the art of the ancient Hellenes, these divine entities appear in striking contrast, each with their unique image. Dionysus, lord of the vine and ecstasy, is usually depicted with an ivy wreath, his robes flowing loosely from his shoulders, and in his hand he holds either a cup full of wine or a thyrsus, an ivy-entwined staff topped with a pine cone. In his gaze an ethereal detachment is readable, as if he contemplates something accessible only to the chosen few, immersed in sacred madness. Hermes, the messenger of the gods, appears lean and athletic, with wings adorning his Petassos hat and sandals, and sometimes even his ankles symbolizing his swiftness. In his hand invariably is the caduceus, a staff entwined with two serpents, which originally served as a symbol of peaceful negotiation, and later, quite curiously, transformed into the emblem of modern medicine. Together, these gods reveal a profound truth. Not all deities are stern warriors or authoritative rulers. Some are eternal wanderers. Others prefer to dance in the mysterious darkness of night, and still others mock locked doors, easily passing through any obstacles. And for the ancient Greeks, this was a source of deep comfort. They understood that even in the most uncertain circumstances, be it facing death, plunging into the depths of madness, or even the mundane loss of livestock, there were deities who could understand them. These were the gods who were willing to walk alongside, share laughter, and guide them on the right path. So now, as your breath evens and your thoughts soften, like twilight descending upon the Aegean Sea, try to imagine them. Dionysus in a forest clearing, where music softly plays, surrounded by flickering torches and dancers who need no names. and Hermes, walking ahead on the road, with a knowing look on his face, a coin tucked in his pocket, always ready to escort you to the next chapter of your journey, wherever it may lead. The vines settle, the wind stills, the road becomes motionless, and these two divine mischief makers silently fade into the world of dreams. The hearth, the grave, and the silent gods, located at the very heart of creation. Take a deep breath and slowly exhale. We have wandered with valiant warriors, shared meals with cunning tricksters, stood beneath looming storm clouds and danced among vineyards. But now, in this final chapter, we come to a quiet sanctuary, a place where peace and presence reign. This is not an absence of anything, but the very stillness one finds upon returning home and closing the door behind them. Tonight, our focus will be on two of the least noticed yet profoundly important gods of the Olympian family, Hestia and Hades. They do not seek the spotlight. They do not meddle in mortal affairs, pursue them, or hurl weapons across the sky. In fact, they rarely leave their posts. One tirelessly tends the fire in every home, every hearth. The other vigilantly watches over every soul that has crossed the threshold of existence. They embody constancy and return, being the Alpha and Omega, the We. Beginning and the end. And despite the fact that myths often focus on louder and more vivid figures, without Hestia and Hades, the entire divine order would surely collapse. Let's begin with Hestia. She is the oldest of the Olympians, the firstborn of the Titans Cronus and Rhea, and the first to be swallowed whole by her father. A charming family, these Titans, one must say. You may recall that Cronus, plagued by a paranoid fear of being overthrown, decided that the best way to avoid this fate was to devour his own children. Hestia, being the eldest, became his first victim. When Zeus finally forced Cronus to disgorge his siblings with the help of a very effective herbal tonic, Hestia emerged last. Thus she was both the firstborn and the last freed, which rather poetically makes her the Alpha and Omega of the Olympian order. And yet, for all this drama surrounding her birth, Hestia is perhaps the least dramatic deity of all. She doesn't cause stormy scenes. She doesn't engage in seductions or intrigues. She doesn't even go on adventures. Instead of all that, she simply remains. Hestia is the goddess of the hearth, the sacred fire burning at the center of every Greek home, every temple, and every city. The hearth was not just a place to warm hands or cook lentils. It served as the spiritual anchor of all life. Families gathered around it. Sacrifices were made there. Prayers began and ended in its flickering light. In every Greek home, Hestia's flame was a quiet but unbreakable promise that no matter the storms of the outside world, there would always be a place, however small, of warmth, safety, and belonging. She never married. She was, to be sure, courted. Yes, both Poseidon and Apollo tried their luck, but she politely refused, taking a vow of eternal virginity, and continued to quietly tend the sacred fire. When the 12 thrones of Olympus were being distributed, she voluntarily gave up her seat so that Dionysus, the youngest of the gods, could take it. She didn't make a fuss. She didn't sulk. She simply chose the center instead of the summit. And in that center, she became the most constant presence in all of Greek life. In cities like Athens, Hestia's sacred flame burned unceasingly in the Pantheon, the public hearth that was always maintained. When a new colony was founded, fire was taken precisely from this hearth and carried across the sea so that the new settlement could begin with Hestia's blessing. Thus she connected the old world and the new, one glowing ember at a time. She had no grand temples because every home was her temple. She had no epic poetry because her story was not one of conquest or disaster. She simply was. She made every ritual, every offering, and every home possible. Even at the beginning of any public or private sacrifice, the Greeks first invoked Hestia. Before the meat hit the altar, before the libation was poured, Hestia was there. At the end, when the last drop of wine was spilled and the smoke rose to the sky, she was there again. To us, this may seem modest, but to the Greeks, it was a display of reverence of the highest order. If Athena was the mind of the city, and Artemis its wild edge, then Hestia was its heart, quietly beating, never seeking attention, but always present. Now transport yourself with me from the warmth of the hearth to the depths of the earth, to another god who rarely spoke, but whose power extended far beyond what most realized. This is Hades, lord of the underworld. He was also a child of Cronus and Rhea, and he too was swallowed and then rescued by Zeus. When the war against the Titans was won, the three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, drew lots to divide the cosmos among themselves. Zeus drew the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades, without any protest, accepted his share, the underworld. Now, let's clarify an important point. He was not cast down. He did not lose. He simply got a job no one else wanted and accepted it quietly, responsibly, and without a single complaint. And it is for this reason that he was so often misunderstood. In later centuries, especially in Roman and Christian retellings, Hades' image was distorted, transforming him into a demonic figure. But for the Greeks, he was not evil. He was inevitability. His realm was not hell. It was simply after, the natural destination of every mortal life. For them, Hades was a grim but dignified ruler. Stern, yes, but by no means cruel. In fact, he is one of the few gods who never cheated on his wife or interfered in mortal affairs just for fun. His name means the Unseen One, and his famous helm of darkness allowed him to move unnoticed even among the gods. It was a very fitting symbol for a god whose work was constant but remained invisible. He ruled justly and orderly. He kept the shades of the dead from wandering and ensured that every soul received its due, whether in the sunless asphodel meadows, the blissful fields of Elysium, or the shadowy depths of Tartarus for the truly wicked. He was feared, yes, but that fear could be respectful. In fact, people avoided speaking his name altogether. Euphemisms such as Pluto, meaning giver of wealth, became common. After all the treasures of the earth, be it gold, silver, crops, or stability, came from beneath the ground. Hades, in his hidden aspect, was not a god of destruction, but a god of hidden riches. And then there is Persephone, queen of the underworld, equal to Hades in title and power. The myth of her is well known. Hades falls in love with Persephone and carries her off to his realm. Her mother, Demeter, goddess of the harvest, grieves and the earth withers. Eventually, a deal is struck. Persephone will spend part of the year with Hades and part with her mother. Thus, the seasons came into being. Spring when she returns, winter when she departs. It is easy to imagine Persephone as a victim, but in older versions of the myth, connected to mystery cults, she is powerful, chosen, even consenting. She is queen not just in name but in role, a guide of the dead and a bridge between life and the afterlife. And Hades remains faithful. Unlike Zeus and Poseidon, he has no wandering eye, no scandals. His love, though strange in form, is unique. This subtle stability was recognized in cult practice. In Eleusis, initiates into the mysteries learned the sacred secrets of death, return, rebirth. And central to it all was Hades, not a tormentor but a keeper, a god who saw to it that nothing was ever truly lost, only transformed. So here in this final chapter we find something curious. The Olympian family is full of movement, war, lust, laughter, fury. But at both ends, framing the myths like candles on a shrine, stand two figures who do not chase, do not flee, but simply hold. Hestia at the center of the home, Hades at the center of the earth. One keeps the fire burning, the other receives the flame when it dies, and neither boasts, though they touch every moment of life. From the first breath at the cradle to the last breath at the tombstone, Hestia and Hades are invisibly present. In the realm of visual arts, ancient Greek deities such as Hestia and Hades appear in images marked by deep tranquility and quiet dignity. Hestia's figure is traditionally depicted veiled, seated in a serene pose, her countenance radiating imperturbability and modesty, and in her hands she carefully holds an unquenchable flame, a symbol of the hearth and the inviolability of existence. Beside her, or in other compositions, appears Hades, his face often adorned with a beard, giving him the appearance of a wise and restrained ruler. He is positioned alongside his royal consort, Persephone. Sometimes in his hands one can see a cornucopia, a powerful symbol that serves as a constant reminder of the inseparable connection between the underworld and the fertility of the earth, of how the forces hidden in the depths nourish and sustain the life blossoming on the surface. Perhaps it is in these understated yet deeply symbolic images that one of the most valuable lessons imparted to humanity by the ancient Greeks lies. True glory is not always manifested in loud pronouncements or ostentatious displays of power. Genuine strength often resides in steadfastness, and the ability to endure in the face of any trial, in a quiet yet unyielding presence that simply continues to exist. Let the hearth fire slowly die down, its last flickers bringing peace. Let the earth, great and silent, gently lull all worries and thoughts, releasing them into oblivion. In the quiet corner of the hearth, an unquenchable flame always glows, its flicker constant, untouched by gusts of wind or the destructive passage of time, serving as an emblem of eternal resilience and constancy. Deep beneath the earth's surface, in silent stone halls, the lord of the underworld, imperturbable and patient, continues his journey through the corridors of memory, guarding the secrets of existence. In this fragile balance between all that constitutes human existence, one can find solace in the thought that Hestia watches over dreams, and Hades preserves peace, and may sleep gently carry one to where these ancient gods, always remaining in their places, still keep their eternal vigil, ensuring the inviolability of creation and the harmony of being, of